What if I told you that in December 1944, a single American tank crew stopped an entire German armored column without firing a single shot? And what if I told you that by the time they did open fire, the battle was already over? Not because of superior firepower, not because of air support, but because 5 men inside a freezing metal box understood something about warfare that most commanders never learn, that sometimes the threat of violence is more powerful than violence itself, and that in the chaos of the Battle of the Bulge, where entire divisions were being overrun and supply lines were collapsing, one crew proved that the most dangerous weapon in war is not the gun. It is the mind of the enemy soldier who believes he is already defeated. If you are here for World War II history, that goes beyond the surface level, beyond the same recycled stories, you have heard 100 times, then subscribe right now. Because this channel exists to uncover the moments that change battles without anyone realizing a battle had even occurred, the stories that reveal how wars are truly won, in the split seconds between thinking and acting, between seeing and understanding. And this is one of those stories. December 16th, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The temperature had dropped below freezing and a thick fog covered the forested hills along the German-Belgian border. American forces holding this section of the front were spread thin, exhausted from months of continuous fighting and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. At 5:30 hours, German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front, the largest German offensive in the West since 1940. The sound was described by survivors as the earth itself, tearing apart, thousands of shells falling simultaneously, turning frozen ground into geysers of mud, snow, and shrapnel. Within hours, German armored columns supported by infantry began pouring through gaps in American lines. Entire regiments were surrounded, cut off, or simply disappeared. Communication broke down, commanders lost contact with their units, and chaos spread faster than the German advance itself. This was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, and for American forces it was a nightmare. In the midst of this chaos, a single M4 Sherman tank, commanded by Staff Sergeant Harold Williams, was positioned near a small crossroads village called Holzmühl. The village itself was insignificant. A handful of stone buildings, a church, a narrow road that connected two larger supply routes. But that road mattered because it was one of the few passable routes for German armor trying to push west toward the Meuse. River Williams' crew had been stationed there for 3 days, providing support to a depleted infantry company that was supposed to be resting in reserve. Instead, they found themselves directly in the path of the German offensive by mid-morning. On December 16th, the infantry company had received orders to withdraw west, toward more defensible positions, but Williams received different orders: hold the crossroads as long as possible, then fall back. His crew consisted of 5 men. Williams as tank commander, Corporal Eddie Martinez; the gunner, Private First Class, Jim O'Connor; the loader, Technician, 5th grade, Robert Chen; the driver, and Private Billy Harper; the assistant driver and bow gunner. They had been together for 7 months, fighting through France and into Belgium. They trusted each other completely, and that trust was about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. By early afternoon, German forces were advancing rapidly through the surrounding forests. American units were retreating in disorder, some in organized columns, others in scattered groups just trying to reach friendly lines. Williams could hear the battle closing in around him. Radio traffic was frantic and contradictory, units calling for support, reporting being overrun, requesting permission to withdraw. The fog made visibility almost impossible beyond 50 yards, and the forested terrain meant they could not see what was coming until it was already on top of them. At 1400 hours, Williams made visual contact with German infantry moving through the trees south of the village. He estimated at least 2 companies, maybe more, moving fast and confident. They were not cautious. They were not expecting resistance. They were advancing like they owned the battlefield. And in that moment, they did. Williams faced an immediate decision: engage the infantry and reveal his position, or stay silent and wait for the armor he knew was coming behind them. If he opened fire, he could inflict casualties on the infantry, but he would give away his position to every German unit in the area. His single Sherman would become a priority target for German tanks, anti-tank guns, and Panzerfaust teams. Once they knew he was there, his survival time would be measured in minutes, but if he stayed silent, he might have the element of surprise when the real threat arrived, the German armor that was certainly following those infantry columns. So Williams made a choice that went against every instinct of a tank commander. He ordered his crew to stay silent to let the German infantry pass, to watch them move through the village and do nothing. Martinez, the gunner, later said it was the hardest thing he ever did in the war. Watching enemy soldiers walk past their position, close enough to hear them talking, knowing he had a 75mm gun and a machine gun and orders not to use them, the German infantry moved through Holzmühl without stopping. They were pushing west, chasing the retreating Americans, and they had no reason to think anyone was still there. The fog helped conceal the Sherman, which was positioned behind a partially collapsed barn, with only its gun visible if you knew where to look. And the Germans did not know where to look. They kept moving. 30 minutes later, Williams heard it, the unmistakable sound of tracked vehicles moving on. Frozen ground, heavy engines, the metallic clank of tank treads. German armor was coming up the road from the east, exactly as he had predicted. Through the fog, he saw them Panzerfraus, at least 4 of them moving in column formation along the narrow road, with infantry riding on the engine decks. They were not in combat formation. They were in road march, traveling fast, trying to exploit the breakthrough. They were not expecting contact, and that was their mistake. Williams' crew stayed silent, watching the German column approach Chen. The driver had the engine idling just enough to keep it from freezing, but not enough to create visible exhaust in the cold air. Harper on the bowgun kept his hands on the trigger, but did not move. Martinez tracked the lead Panzer through his gun sight, his hand resting on the firing mechanism. O'Connor had a round already loaded, and 3 more ready within arm's reach. And Williams watched calculating distances, angles, timing, waiting for the exact moment when silence would become more dangerous than action. The German column reached a point 200 yards from Williams' position, still moving, still unaware, and then Williams saw something that changed everything. The lead Panzer slowed the commander in the turret, was scanning the area with binoculars. Looking at the village, looking at the barn, looking almost directly at Williams' position, he had not seen them yet, but he was looking, and in another few seconds, he would see the Sherman. The moment of surprise was collapsing. Williams had maybe 5 seconds to make a decision. Fire now and take the lead tank but alert the others, or wait and risk being spotted first. And here is where the story becomes something most documentaries never explain, because Williams did not order his crew to fire. Instead, he did something that seems almost insane. He ordered Chen to move the tank forward 10 feet, just enough to become fully visible to the German column to announce their presence without firing a shot. Chen later said he thought Williams had lost his mind, that he was about to get them all killed. But he followed the order anyway, and the Sherman rolled forward out from behind the barn into full view of the German column, and for approximately 3 seconds, nothing happened. The German tank commander saw the Sherman. His entire body language changed. He dropped his binoculars, grabbed his radio handset, and Williams could see him shouting into it. The German column stopped, the lead. Panzer turret began to traverse toward Williams' position, and every man in that Sherman knew they were about to die because there was no way they could fire. First traverse their gun, acquire the target and shoot. Before the Germans did, they were exposed, outnumbered, and outgunned, and they had just announced their presence without taking the first shot. If you are starting to realize this story is not going where you thought it was going, and you want to see how the most unconventional decision in tank warfare actually played out, make sure you hit that like button right now, because it tells the algorithm that this kind of deep tactical analysis is exactly what World War II history channels should be covering. And if you are not subscribed yet, do that now, because we are just getting to the part where everything you think you know about armored combat gets completely turned upside down. But here is what happened next. The thing that no one expected. The German column did not fire the lead. Panzer stopped traversing its gun. The turret froze halfway through its rotation. And for a moment, that felt like an eternity. Both sides just stared at each other. Williams could see the German tank commander, still holding his radio, handset still shouting into it. And then the entire German column began to reverse. The Panzers started backing up. Infantry jumped off the engine decks and scattered into the trees. And within 60 seconds, the entire German formation was withdrawing back down the road, disappearing into the fog, retreating from a single American tank that had not fired a single shot. Martinez broke the silence inside the Sherman, asking the question everyone was thinking, what the hell just happened? And Williams' response was simple. They think we are the forward element of an entire American armored column. They think they just ran into a trap, and they are pulling back to regroup before they assault what we are not here. Now let me explain exactly why this worked, and why it represents one of the most sophisticated pieces of tactical psychology in World War II. Armored warfare. German doctrine in 1944 emphasized aggressive movement, exploitation of breakthroughs, and maintaining momentum during offensive operations. But that same doctrine also emphasized caution when encountering unexpected resistance. German tank commanders were trained to avoid advancing blindly into potential ambushes, especially in close terrain like forests and villages, where American tank destroyers and anti-tank guns could be concealed. The standard German response to unexpected contact during an advance was to halt, deploy infantry to scout ahead, and call for artillery or air support before continuing. This was sound tactical thinking. It preserved combat power and prevented units from being destroyed, piecemeal by hidden defenses, but it also created a vulnerability. If you could make the Germans think they were advancing into a prepared defense, you could stop their momentum without actually having that defense, and that is exactly what Williams did. By revealing his position without firing, Williams created ambiguity. The Germans could not tell if his Sherman was alone or if it was part of a larger force. The fog and terrain made visual reconnaissance impossible, and radio reports from other German units were probably already reporting heavy American resistance elsewhere. Along the front, the German tank commander had to make an immediate decision: push forward and risk running into an American defensive position, or pull back, regroup, and advance with proper support. He chose caution, and in that moment, caution was exactly what Williams needed him to choose, because every minute the Germans spent regrouping was another minute for American forces to withdraw, reposition, and establish new defensive lines. Williams was not trying to defeat the German column, he was trying to delay it, and by appearing at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way, he made the Germans defeat themselves through their own hesitation. But the story does not end there, because Williams understood something else that most tank commanders missed. He knew the Germans would come back, and when they did, they would come prepared with artillery support, infantry screens, and probably air reconnaissance if available, which meant his window of opportunity was closing. He had maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes before the Germans reorganized and resumed their advance. And when that happened, his single Sherman would be facing overwhelming force. So Williams made his second critical decision. He ordered Chen to reposition the tank 200 yards west to a new position on the opposite side of the village, where he had clear lines of fire down the road. The Germans had just retreated down, and then he did something even more unexpected. He ordered Harper to dismount and use white phosphorus grenades to create smoke screens at 3 different points around the village, making it look like multiple vehicles were repositioning, making it look like an entire American unit was moving into defensive positions. This was pure deception. There was no American unit. There was 1 Sherman and 5 men, but Williams was creating the illusion of strength, the illusion of preparation, the illusion that attacking this village would be costly. 18 minutes later, the Germans returned, but this time they did not advance down the road. They deployed infantry first, sending scouts through the trees, approaching cautiously, exactly as Williams had predicted. And when those scouts saw the smoke screens, saw the Sherman in its new position, and reported back, the German response was exactly what Williams needed. They called for artillery support. At 1600 hours, German mortars began falling on Holzmühl. Williams had already moved his crew into the stone church basement, where they waited while the barrage destroyed the village. Around them, the Germans were doing Williams' job for him. They were wasting time, ammunition, and resources, bombarding a position that contained 1 tank and 5 men, who were already protected in the only hardened structure in the village. After 30 minutes of bombardment, the German infantry advanced and found nothing. The Sherman was gone. Williams had used the artillery barrage as cover to withdraw west, down a farm trail that did not appear on German maps. By the time German forces secured Holzmühl, Williams and his crew were 3 miles away, linking up with American forces, establishing a new defensive line. Now here's why this matters beyond just 1 tank crew surviving 1 engagement. Williams' delay of the German column had cascading effects that rippled across the entire sector. The German advance in that area was supposed to reach the Meuse River within 48 hours. Instead, it took 5 days partially because units kept encountering unexpected resistance that turned out to be smaller than expected. But by the time they realized that American forces had already repositioned, German commanders became increasingly cautious, slowing their advance, checking every village, every crossroads, expecting ambushes that often were not there. Williams had planted a seed of doubt that grew into operational hesitation across an entire German corps, and that hesitation gave American forces time to rush reinforcements into the Ardennes, time to establish the defensive perimeter around Bastogne, and time to turn the Battle of the Bulge from a potential disaster into an Allied victory post. War interviews with German officers who participated in the Ardennes offensive revealed that one of their greatest frustrations was the constant uncertainty about American dispositions. They reported encountering resistance in places intelligence said should be undefended, finding positions abandoned that they expected to be heavily fortified, and losing time to reconnaissance and preparation that turned out to be unnecessary. This was not accidental. This was the cumulative effect of dozens of small unit actions like Williams, where American forces created the appearance of strength they did not have, where individual crews and platoons made tactical decisions that prioritized delay and deception over direct engagement, and where the psychological impact of uncertainty proved more valuable than firepower. Williams himself never considered what he did particularly heroic in his after-action report. He simply stated that he assessed the tactical situation, determined that engagement would result in the loss of his vehicle without significant enemy casualties, and chose an alternative method to accomplish his mission of delaying the German advance. His crew received no medals for this action, no dramatic recognition, because from a purely statistical perspective, they accomplished nothing remarkable. They did not destroy any enemy vehicles. They did not hold a position against overwhelming odds. They delayed an enemy column for approximately 4 hours and then withdrew. But those 4 hours mattered more than anyone realized at the time, because they were part of a larger pattern of American units refusing to collapse, refusing to panic, and finding creative ways to slow the German offensive even when they were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. The broader lesson here is something that military theorists have studied for decades, but most people never learn. Warfare is not just about destroying the enemy. It is about controlling the enemy's perception of the battlefield, making them see threats that do not exist, making them hesitate when they should advance, making them waste resources, preparing for battles that never happen. This is psychological warfare at the tactical level, and it requires a fundamentally different mindset than conventional combat. It requires understanding that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the one you fire, but the one you make. The enemy believe you are about to fire. It requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to accept risk in ways that seem irrational because you are betting that the enemy will respond predictably to uncertainty. And when that bet pays off, the results can be far more significant than any direct engagement. Williams and his crew survived the Battle of the Bulge and continued fighting through Germany until the war ended. Chen, the driver, was killed in March 1945 by artillery fire near the Rhine. Martinez returned home and never spoke about the war. Harper became a teacher. O'Connor worked in construction, and Williams himself lived until 1998, rarely discussing his military service in detail. But in December 1944, in a small Belgian village whose name most people cannot even pronounce, they demonstrated that the principles of warfare extend far beyond firepower, and that sometimes the most decisive victories are the ones where no one fires a shot until the outcome is already determined. If this story changed the way you think about tank warfare, about tactical decision-making, and about how battles are truly won in those critical moments of uncertainty, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Subscribe now, because every video on this channel is designed to uncover these hidden moments, the decisions that shaped World War II in ways most documentaries completely miss, the stories that prove wars are won, not just by the biggest armies or the best technology, but by individual soldiers making split-second choices that ripple across entire campaigns. Thank you for watching. And I will see you in the next one, where we continue exploring the invisible mechanics of the Second World War, the moments that mattered most, precisely because no one saw them coming.